So here I've sanded 2 of the fins with 150 grit sandpaper, and you notice they clean up really well. And so what you should have is something like this, where mostly what you see is wood, and then there's just a little bit of white in there where it's filling in the wood grain. Now this needs to be sanded with 400 grit sand or 200 grit sandpaper first, but I wanted to show the last one here just to show you how quickly this goes. I'm very impressed with how well this particular type of filler has been working. And so here I've got 150 grit sanding with the grain. And I'm not speeding this one up at all. You're seeing this real time. Okay. Now, at some point, make sure you get the edges as well, especially the root edge, so that we have a good adhesion surface here. And it does get dusty, but it really doesn't clog up the sandpaper very much. Okay, so that didn't take very long at all to sand that down. A little bit left there. Alright, now I will give these one more sanding with 200 grit sandpaper just to give some nice fine smoothness to it. And after that we'll be ready to put them onto the rocket. Now I generally don't do unpaid endorsements. I don't do that many paid ones either. It's really hard to get those. But I'm sure someone's going to ask me what wood filler I was using in these videos, and it's this DAP premium wood filler. Okay, so it's got the white color to it. It mixes very well with water or with alcohol. I did not find any warping of the wood with this, so now you know. I had hoped to mark the body tube and attach the fins next, but the glue on my forward centering ring is still wet, and I don't want to mess with things while that is such the case. So I'm going to work on the parachute here. So we've got our parachute shroud lines, and I'm just going to set those aside for the moment. Okay, these are reinforcements for the parachute shroud line attachments, and then we have the sheet itself. Okay, now this is fairly big, and Apogee makes this so that you can cut it out for either a 22-inch parachute or excuse me, a 24-inch parachute or a 32-inch parachute. And as I recall, this is requiring the 32. I'm going to make sure here. Yes. Okay. So the first thing we need to do is cut the outer line here, not the inner one. And you can use your hobby knife or scissors. Ideally, you find that sweet spot in your scissors like this, and you just slide it along. And then invariably something goes wrong. actually took a bit of time there. Pretty big parachute. And in fact, if you're going to fly this one a lot, it's probably worth investing in a cloth one. Okay, so now we're going to go through with our little donuts here. So these are the reinforcements, and these will go one on each of the circular spots here. Okay, it looks like mine's actually a short one. Fortunately, I do keep these in my own kit. So I buy these in the business section of department stores where they're used as reinforcements for paper and 3-ring binders. All right, after you have that, then take a pen or a pencil, not a knife. A knife can actually slice through the reinforcements. So come from the back side and just push through like that. I actually broke that reinforcement. It's not quite as tough as the other ones. Now we need our string. Okay, so this is an octagonal parachute, which means we need 4 shroud lines, and each shroud line will go in between 2 corners. So the main trick here is getting all this out without causing a great big knot. So just gently pull through, and if it does start forming a knot, slow down and open it up. Okay, so now we just go all the way through. Alright, so now I have one big length, and the first thing I'll do is find both of the ends. And hold them together. Boy, that's a lot of string there. Okay, and now I'm going to pull the string through while holding the ends. Alright, so pull these through. The string is just getting everywhere. Alright, so that brings us to a loop. Okay, now without letting go of the strings, we're going to come back to the ends here. And bring that to here. Okay, and then we're going to cut the loop. Alright, and then once more, holding those strings together, we're going to pull them all through my other fingers here. Okay, where it should come down to 2 loops. That if we've done everything, should be right next to each other, and we cut through those. So now we have 4 pieces of string. Okay, and so we're just going to take one of those strings here, pick a corner, and push it through from the back side. And the trick here is to try and use about the same amount of string with each knot. And so I'm just tying a double knot there, or 2 half hitches. And then I'm going to go to the adjacent corner here with the other end and do the same thing. Now there's no specific trick to getting this to being equal all the time. It just takes practice. And as long as you're close, it's not a big deal if they're a little bit off. Okay, and I'm just going to continue this all the way around. Okay, so now we've got 4 loops all around here. And this big parachute does not fit under the camera very well. Okay, so it helps if you kind of let them all dangle down here for a bit. Alright, then we're going to take each one and loop them here onto a finger. Alright, and now I'm going to hold the parachute in the middle here of the sheet. Alright, and I've got all the loops down here. Okay, and if I pull all those tight, all of the corners there should be pretty close to each other. And you can kind of move each shroud line a little bit to equalize them if needed. So that's good about there. Okay, now there are 2 ways you can do this next part. Alright, one is to tie them directly to the nose cone. Okay, now I'm in the middle of painting my nose cone here, but if you want to do it this way, you simply pass all these loops through the eyelet, pull those through till it's big enough that you pass the entire parachute through, and then you would pull that tight once it goes through. Now I'm not going to do that because if you've seen any of my other videos, you know that I really prefer to use snap swivels rather than attaching the parachute permanently. Okay. Now, in this case, most snap swivels are not going to fit on there. So I'm going to go check my stock and see what I've got. But we might actually have to use a quick link and a barrel swivel for this one. This is about the largest barrel swivel that I've found on the market around here. And it just barely fits. So I'm going to go ahead and go with it. The main thing here is that it needs to be able to move freely on the nose cone eyelet when it's closed, and this one just barely does. Okay, so we could go with a quick link and a barrel swivel, and that's what you tend to see in more high power rocketry, but that would add quite a bit of weight to it that we really don't need for this. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and re-find all my loops here. Alright, so once more, kind of move these relative to each other till those are all about the same spot. Alright, and now you want to make sure you're always holding on to them at some point so they don't change length on us. Alright, I'm going to take all of those loops and pass them through the swivel end here, the round end, like this. Okay, open the loops back up again, and we're going to pass this whole thing through the loop. Pull the loops downward and pull that tight. Okay, recheck and make sure that your corners are still there. This is about the last time that you can check things and change them. If it's not where you want them, loosen this up and try again. Okay, but once you've got that where you want it, add a little dab of white or wood glue here to lock those threads into place so they don't come loose on you when you don't want them to, and you end up with a cockeyed parachute. Okay. Now the advantage to this is, one, a lot of Rocketeers don't like to store their parachutes in their rockets, especially bigger ones like this. And two, it allows you to change them out. So maybe you're flying on a windier day and you think this will be too lofty and you don't want it to drift away on you. You could easily change this out, put in, say, a 24-inch parachute, fly it for that day, and then when you've got a calm day again and you want a slower descent, you can change it back out and put this one back in. Okay? We are at last ready to put the fins on, and so first we need to mark the tube and cut out this tube marking guide here. Now we need the lower body tube, and we're going to wrap this around the aft end. Now my personal preference is to put the launch lug on the same side as the engine clip here. So I'm going to line those two up. Okay, we're going to wrap this around. And we want those two little tick marks to line up. And I am intentionally leaving some space down here so I can see the tick marks when I go to actually mark the fins. Okay, I think we've got this here. Alright, once you've got that on, go ahead and just put a little bit of tape on there of whatever sort you have handy. And then I'm going to put just a little bit of tape down here so that my tube marking guide doesn't slide around on me. Okay, now we're just going to go around and make a little tick mark here at each spot. Okay, I'm going to mark this with an LL. It kind of looks like an LL to denote the launch lug. Okay, and that should be all of it. And I'll just gently take this tape back off. I'm not going to throw it away quite yet, just in case I have to remark something. Okay, now we're going to draw some lines here. And you can do this on a door frame or a drawer edge. I've got this handy dandy tube marking guide. This is actually one of the better tools I've invested in. Alright, and it's just a whole bunch of straight lines, and so you can put tubes on here against one of the proper height, and then we'll just mark these. I'm going to go about halfway up the tube here so that I get good alignment. Now for the launch lug line, this is going to go all the way along the length of the tube. Okay, and then we got two more fin lines here. Okay, now by drawing the fin lines so far up, I can use it to help align the fins when we're putting them on. Alright, so we should have 3 shorter lines and 1 long line there, and we do. Okay, so we are about ready to attach the fins here. Alright, so these are going to go like this. Remember, this has kind of inverted fins here. Alright, and our leading edge is going forward. So what I'm going to do here is first add some glue to the fin along its root edge here. And I'm not going to use before we do the fins, what I want to do is just use them as a guide here. And find my pencil. Here we go. And just give a little tick mark at the end of the root edge here. And then I'm going to sand this a little bit. And so since this has butt jointed fins here, and they're fairly big, there's going to be a lot of strain on that glue where we put it on. So now I'm just going to take some sandpaper here. This is 100 grit. Anything between about 100 and 200 is fine. And I'm just going to roughen that edge Okay, so right that line there, not really, I guess it's a line, not an edge, but just take a couple of strokes here, right along your fin lines. Now the launch lug lines will roughen as well, but we need to figure out where the lugs are actually going first. So we'll come back to them later. Okay, but this just gives us a better gripping surface for the glue. Not sure what's wrong with my lips today. I'm adding a bead of glue to the root edge, and we don't want it really thick. We actually want this to be thin enough to dry fairly quickly, and then we'll reinforce it a little bit later on. Okay, now I'm going to take my fin here, line it up to my body tube, and right on that line. Okay, I'm going to stick that on there. A little bit off. I'm going to move the glue around. Like that. I'm going to pull it back off. Now I'm going to allow this to set and dry for about a minute, and then we'll come back and put it on. About 60 seconds have passed, and now I'm going to go ahead and put this right back on the line there. And during those 60 seconds, the glue has become tacky. And so the idea here is that it will stay in place better. Now, if you have a fin alignment guide, this is a good time to use it. Oops. See, I don't like these heavy fins on this. Come back. Alright, as I was saying, this is a good time to use a fin alignment guide if you have one. This one here is just made out of cardboard. It's sold by Apogee. And we're definitely going to need it because this heavy fin here is just not wanting to stay. This has been another good investment, even though it seems like you're paying a lot of money for a bunch of cardboard. But this does help keep the fins aligned and straight here. As I said, especially when you got really big fins like this on a butt joint, where it's all the stress is right on that glue joint. Alright, I'm going to let this dry for about 15 minutes here, and then I'll go on and do the other two fins in the same manner. I will do all that off camera though. The glue on the fins is dry, and they're looking pretty good there. We're definitely going to need some fillets though. Alright, next we're going to put the launch lug on, and this is going to go all the way at the end of the lower body tube. Okay, so now that I've got that there, I'm going to go ahead and take my sandpaper here, and just like I did with the fins, I'm just going to roughen this up by passing the sandpaper over it a few times. Okay, and then we're going to add a fairly thin bead of glue here. Oh, one other thing we can do is roughen up where we're going to put the glue. There we go. And just like the fins, we're going to put an initial layer here that's fairly thin, and then we'll come back and put fillets on it to reinforce it. Okay, so all the way up. And now the line I made in there I can use to sight my launch lug so that it is indeed going parallel to the body tube. If it's not, you can move it back and forth or twist it to get it to go straight. I'm going to look from both ends here. Okay, it's looking just a little bit off. That looks pretty good. Okay, so I'm going to let this dry, and when I come back we'll put fillets on everything. The glue on my launch lug is now dry enough that we can handle it. And so at this point I'm going to put fillets on everything. I'm just going to wind up my shot cord here and stuff it down inside. Now notice we haven't put that other body tube on yet, whereas the instructions would have had us done it by now. And the reason for that is it just makes the rocket easier to handle if we don't have an extra 18 inches of body tube sticking out here. All right, now my fillets, I'm going to put on 2 layers and let it dry in between. Just because, as I've mentioned several times already, these fins are really heavy and put a lot of force down on here. And so we're going to need to reinforce this really well. But if I put one big heavy fillet on this, it's not going to dry evenly. It's going to tend to follow gravity. So if I don't have this exactly level, it tends to migrate. So I'm going to do this in 2 layers at least. And generally I like to do facing fins at a time. So first I'll do this one and just run a not very big bead of glue. And do the same on the facing fin. Okay, and I'm going to want something to wipe my fingers on here. And now I'm just going to smooth this in. That was the sound of the other body tube falling over. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing here and just smooth this one in. I'm going to do it twice because it was a little thinner there. Okay, and then I'll just continue in the same way all around the rocket with each of the fins. And then I'll also do the same thing with the launch lug. Now note there are a couple of little bubbles there. If I were just doing a single layer fillet, I would add just a little bit more glue to that. But bubbles tend to make more bubbles anyway. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to allow all these fillets to dry for at least half an hour, possibly longer. My fillets have been drying for about 2, maybe 3 hours here. And so I'm going to go ahead and put the second layer on. Now this should fill in any little bubble holes that we had. If it doesn't, we can add some modeling putty later on. So just like we did before, I'm just going to do these 2 facing fins at a time and smooth them in. Now, once again, I'm going to let these dry for several hours and then we'll see how they look. All of my fillets are dry and the fins are looking pretty good. I don't see any bubbles or gaps in there. Over here on the launch lug we do have some bubbles. Now structurally this is fine, but aesthetically we probably want to fill those in. Now if you just keep adding more glue, a lot of times those bubbles get worse. And so I'm going to use some plastic model contour putty here. The one I've got is made by Testers. There are actually several brands out there. You could also use wood filler for this if you like. This one is a fairly fast drying one. And so we just squeeze this into our fillet area here. And then you want to smooth it very quickly. As I said, it will start drying almost immediately, and once it starts doing that, when you work on it, it'll start to kind of roll and pill up and make a mess. Do the same thing here. Now this is only for filling. It does not provide any strength. So if you need stronger fillets here, go ahead and use glue and then use this over the glue. Okay. And then once this is dried, we can sand it as needed to help blend it into the rest of the rocket. Now, while that is drying, we've kind of finally reached the point here of adding on our second tube. So the first thing we're going to need to do, first we need to find the middle of our coupler here. And the coupler is 4 inches, so we'll just make a mark here at 2. Okay, and then inside here, I've just kind of got the shock cord bundled up. We're actually going to want to push this through and out the other end. Now in the instructions it shows just kind of threading this through the coupler. There is always the chance of getting glue on it that way. So like we did earlier, I'm just going to slide this down through the motor mount there, the stuffer tube. And the hardest part is getting it to go down through the thrust ring there. So I'm going to take this over off camera where I can drop it down straight. Okay, and then we just pull this back through. And now on the front end here, that's going to be nice and out of the way. I don't know if you can see that there. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and put on a bead of glue, and you can do either one of these first. I'm going to do the lower tube first here. So just inside we're going to put in some glue all the way around. Let's see if we can get this in the light a little better. Okay, and now we're just going to push this in, give it a little twist as we go to seat the glue well, and push that right up to that marking there. Okay, now we're going to take the other tube, actually we're going to wait. Okay. I'm going to wait for about 5 minutes for the glue to set there so that when we put the other tube on, we don't accidentally push the coupler in further. Enough time has elapsed here that we should be able to do this without any problem. I'm going to give it a little pull and a push here, and it's fine. So now we'll go ahead and add a bead of glue to the inside of the upper body tube. This is going to be just in the same way that we did the lower one. And then we're just going to, same way, instead of twisting the coupler on, we'll twist the tubes. If you want, you can even make the lines line up there. It's not necessary. But if you're a little bit OCD. Okay. Now this gap here, if that concerns you, you can fill it in with the contour putty as well. Okay, so here, I'm just going to add it along the seam. And you only really want as much as what's actually required to fill this in. Adding more just means you have more dry time and more sanding time. Okay, and once again, I'm just going to smooth this all the way around. You can see where it's already starting to dry and kind of catch and build up here. Okay, and to get this perfectly smooth, you may have to do more than one application. Okay, so once again here, everything gets to dry. Here I have sanded the area where we had put the putty on, so the seam between the tubes here as well as the fillets of the launch lug. Now I sanded this with 220 grit sandpaper, and it also removed the glossy finish of the paper here. And that's something you want to be careful of. You don't want to sand this so much that you ruin the tube here. However, once I get primer on this, that should fill in any scratches there. And it also tends to show up any other defects in the sanding here that can then be repaired with additional putty or additional sanding. I've also put the shock cord back up where it belongs, and we're about ready to paint this. So I'm going to take the shock cord and just stuff it down inside so we don't get paint on it. And then you can just put a couple of paper towels or something similar down inside here so that we don't get paint down on the inside of the rocket. Okay. Now I'm not really set up to show painting in progress, but I will give this a couple of coats of primer and sand it and then paint it, and I'll kind of give you the in-between steps in how it looks here. So here's the rocket after it's had 2 coats of a sandable filling primer. Alright, and this especially worked well on the fins there. You can barely see the fin seams. Now fortunately this stuff dries fairly quickly, so I'm going to give it an hour to fully dry, and then I will sand this with some 400 to 600 grit sandpaper. Now as far as the spirals in the tube are concerned, I don't worry about them. If you don't like spirals in your tube, there are a couple things you can do. You can fill those with wood filler or the contour putty that I used on the seam. The filling primer that I use can also fill these, but it takes a lot of coats. And so I usually don't worry about the spirals anymore. I've spent enough time trying to fill them, and in the end it just doesn't make that much of a difference to me. Here's the rocket after I have primed it, and then I dry sanded it with some 400 grit sandpaper. Now the reason I didn't do a wet sanding is because the layer of the primer is not very thick, and it's very easy then to sand through that, and I don't want any wetness in the cardboard of the tube there. And so you can see a few places, like right here, where I actually went through the primer. If I had done that while wet sanding, it would have damaged the cardboard here. A little bit up here as well. Okay. Mainly what this has done is smooth out any fibers that were sticking up, especially where we sanded the cardboard at the joint. And also any that were on the wood of the fins. And then just in general, any high points caused by paint splatters and things like this. Now if you want an even smoother finish, you could add another layer or 2 of primer here and then sand it again. For my purposes, this looks fine to me, and I'm going to prep this for painting. Before I paint it, I'm going to get this is basically a very large tissue here, and I'm going to moisten it with just a little bit of alcohol and use this kind of like a tacky strip here just to remove any of the dust. Because I have found that if you got dust left on here, it'll cause your paint to crinkle at times. It's one of the many causes of paint crinkling. Okay, so I'm just going to run this over the whole rocket here. You don't want a lot of alcohol in here, just enough to moisten it a little bit so it can pick up the dust. Okay. Now in the instructions, it calls for a silver nose cone, a black body, and silver or white fins. I've got my silver nose cone. I've been working on this already. Okay, and it's come out fairly nicely. It might use another coat. So this has got 2 coats of primer that were then wet sanded, 2 coats of paint that were wet sanded, and then another 2 coats of paint. It's not as smooth as I might like it, but I'm not sure that continuing this is going to make it even better. So I'm just going to leave that the way it is. Okay, now on mine, I don't think I'm going to do the silver fins. I'm going to paint the whole thing black, and then I'm going to overpaint that with a color changing iridescent top coat. It looks really cool. And so I think painting the silver on the fins would just take away from that coolness factor. So I'm going to let this dry for 15 to 30 minutes, make sure we get all the alcohol off of this, and then we'll start the painting. Alright, here is the Grappler after 2 coats of primer, sanding, 2 coats of gloss black, and then 2 coats of color shift blue. Now the color shift you can kind of see here, it's even more spectacular out in the bright sun. And basically you can kind of tune this to how you want it. So if you just give it one light coat, it looks more of a metallic green than anything else. And then if you give it additional coats, the color shift between green and blue becomes more prominent. Okay, so I really can't get all this under here at once, but this needs to dry for 48 or 24 hours at least before we put the decals on, but we're almost there. My paint has dried for more than 24 hours, and so we are ready to put the decals on. These are self-adhesive decals, but they're not the typical opaque vinyl that we find in lots of Apogee kits. However, the method of wetting the decal to allow it to be placed and replaced can still be used on this, although it's going to look kind of strange. It gives it kind of a whitish cast for a while. That does go away. So the first thing I'm going to do is just cut this out. I'm going to start with the main Grappler here. Now these are semi-transparent, so it's something to keep in mind when you think about the color of your rocket. Alright, I'm going to trim that back a little bit more. And now I'm going to take some scissors here, and I'm going to round off these corners so they're less likely to peel up later on. Alright, so we can refer to the front piece here for the suggested placement of the decals. You don't have to do them this way, nor are the decals required for flight. They just look nice. Alright, and I've got a basin of water here to which I've added a single drop of dishwashing liquid. And so I'm just going to peel this off. Alright, and then carefully I'm going to just wet the back of it. And this is going to temporarily decrease the stickiness of the adhesive. Okay, and now we can just place this approximately where we want it. Okay, now you can look at that back and forth. That looks pretty good to me. Alright, so now I'm going to take a tissue here, and I'm just going to gently squeegee this down, going from the center and working outward. Okay, now before I get it completely down, I'm going to check it again. Still looking good. Alright, one more check. Okay, so that looks good. I'll get some more tissue here. And now I'm just going to go ahead and squeeze as much of that water out as I can. Alright, now again, this may show some bubbles and such for a while. And just need to squeeze those out. And then some of this will go away as the water evaporates more. So it might take, in some cases, up to about a week to get all that out. Now you don't have to do it this way. If you're really good at placing decals correctly the first time, you can just plop these right on without using any water or detergent here like I'm using. A lot of times I think I've got it exactly where I want to, and then I get all done and it looks crooked. Okay, so we've also got decals for the fins. Okay, so these ones are going to go on the fins. These ones are supposed to look like rivets here. They can go around the body tube wherever you like them. And then the Dyna-Star logos here, they can also go wherever you want them there. Okay, so I'm going to take this off camera to do the rest of the decals, and when I come back, we'll put the whole rocket together. As I'm attaching the fin decals here, I'm finding that we really don't need the water. They are removable enough. Now for these you want to trim the decal right up to its edge, and then the red pointy part here is going to go right at the vertex of the fin and along the leading edge here, and then that comes right down to the body tube. Now if you do get a little bubble there, this will lift up and peel a little paint there, but we won't be able to see it here in a moment. Alright, the previous fin actually didn't have any problem at all. Okay, so we can just press that down. Alright, now you can still use the water method. I tried one fin with it and one fin without. And then this one I tried again without. So whatever works best for you there. Okay, and I'm going to go back off camera to continue putting these on. Here I have the decals on. Now again, this bubbly stuff here where we use the water on it, this will go away in sometimes up to a week, but it will go away. Just every so often come back and squish it down again. Down on the fins here, we've got the fin decals. Putting them against a dark surface here gives them less contrast, but they still work. Now I did decide to leave off the rivet decals just because I don't think they add that much to it, and it kind of detracts from the color shift finish that I've got on here. So our last thing to do is to add the parachute, the nose cone, and attach the shock cord. Okay, so my nose cone here is all nicely painted silver. And now we're just going to remove the paper towel that we had in there. Alright, oop, we got a knot in the shock cord. Hang on. Okay, so for our shock cord here, we're just going to tie it on to the nose cone. Whoop, that thing really wants to move around. Okay, so I'm going to do this with a double knot or 2 half hitches. Like so. Alright, I'm going to pull this down. Alright, get that nice and tight. And then you can go ahead, if you like, go ahead and put a drop of super glue on that knot. You can see it's already trying to come loose. Kevlar does not hold knots well, just because its surface is kind of slick. So I'm going to pull that tight again. Okay, and then from the beginning of this video we have the parachute here. Alright, and recall that I put a snap swivel on here. If you don't want to do that, you can just tie this directly onto the eyelet as shown in the instructions. All right, I'm going to go ahead and attach this. And as I mentioned earlier, this is about the biggest snap swivel you can get, and it just barely goes on here. I said kind of debating back and forth whether to actually use a quick link on this, and you could. Okay, and then for folding the parachute, my current favorite way to do this is to lay out the parachute here. Basically fold it in half. Now, this is a big parachute. Okay, but we want all of the corners overlapping another corner here. So we've got this corner here is overlapping this one, and that's happening all the way around. So we've got a corner over here that's overlapping. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to take the outermost corners, and I'm off camera now. This corner I'm going to take and put it over here. Okay, so this was my outer corner, and bring that in. I'm going to do the same on the other side. So the two corners here are going to overlap over here, like such. Alright, and then we're going to fold this in half again, so that now all of the corners are overlapping each other down here at the bottom. Alright, I'm going to bring out our shroud lines. Alright, and I'm going to take all the shroud lines here and roughly grab a halfway point and bring those up into the parachute like that. And down here at the end I should have about 2 to 3 centimeters or about an inch worth of shroud lines sticking out. Okay, I'm going to fold this over the shroud lines on one edge and then do the other. Okay, and then I'm going to bring this down and bring it down again. Okay, and since this has a big body tube, I want this to be fairly large, kind of like a piston there. Alright, now if you are going to excuse me, prepare this for launch, you'll need some form of wadding down in there. You can use traditional like Estes, basically tissue paper wadding, but it's going to take a lot. For rockets this large, I tend to use blown cellulose insulation, colloquially known as dog barf, or I'll use a permanent parachute protector that fits over the shock cord, something like this. Now this one is not for this rocket, but this is just basically a piece of Nomex with a hole punched in it here so that the shock cord goes through and you can wrap this around. Okay, I'm not actually doing this for launch right now, so I'm not going to put anything down in there. Alright, now our shock cord, let me bring this forward a little bit. I'm going to run out of hands. Alright, off camera with the rocket for just a moment. I'll lay that down right there. Alright, the shock cord you can just loosely push down into the body tube, which this is kind of like radio now. I'm telling you what I'm doing, but you can't see it. Alright, then we're going to take the parachute here again. Alright, we're going to stuff that in, and then we got a little bit of remaining shock cord here. Man, this is a big rocket, and it's kind of unwieldy doing this under a camera. Alright, then we're going to stick everything in, making sure that nothing gets caught between the shoulder and the body tube here. Let's go ahead and slide that on. Alright, it's almost too big to do this under the camera, but do a shake test. Alright, so the nose cone should not be coming off of its own accord there, but you should be able to move it fairly easily. So, from nose to body to fins, this is my Grappler. I hope you had fun building this with me. Have a great launch and a safe recovery, and please stay tuned for more of my videos.